All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Goblin King YouTube channel. Today we're going to be doing another book review. We're going to continue doing some Star Wars content because today's video is going to be reviewing a very good book in my opinion, but Darth Maul Shadow Hunter. And this is the first Star Wars actual novel book that I've actually ever read. I know for a lot of you that have maybe watched my Star Wars videos on this channel, I am someone that I wouldn't say is the biggest Star Wars fan. I was a really big fan of the Star Wars prequel era. It's what I grew up on. I think the originals are really good as well. And I'm someone that's kind of been out of Star Wars for, I would say, a good amount of time. Disney Star Wars to me has just completely taken me out of being a Star Wars fan. And I want to say, before we get into the book review, this is a Legends book, so technically this is not canon. In my head canon, it's canon, so take that as you will. But if you are actually following the real Star Wars canon, none of this is actually the correct, I guess, story. So without further ado, let's just get into the story. It's fantastic. We're going to go through some of the plot points of it. We're going to go through some of the themes of the story, some of the big talking points of the story. And by the end of it, I will give you guys my overall grade for the story and all of that. But before we get into it, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment for more of these book reviews, especially Star Wars. Also, guys, if you have some Star Wars books that you think I would like, recommend them to me. I really would like to get into more of these books. This is the first one, like I said, that I've actually read for Star Wars. So yeah, let me know if you guys have any book recommendations down in the comments. So let's get into it. So the first part I want to talk about is, how is this story structured? So we see that this story has three different kind of parts to it. So the first, 3/4 of the story is all about one story. It's about two stories that are basically titled Mean Streets and Labyrinth. So that's kind of the first story that we get. There is a second story that's in here that is also named Darth Maul Saboteur, and that's a completely different story. It's actually it doesn't have anything really to do with the first story, and it's a bit different. And then the last 30-40 pages are again another story, a very short story where we look at Darth Maul kind of in his youth. So why I'm bringing this up is because we're going to go through each individual one of these stories in this video, but I want to talk about the structure first of all, because I think of anything that I would consider a negative about this book, and again, I want to say that I think this book is really, really good. The one thing I really don't think makes much sense is that if you want to read this from a timeline point of view, it's actually backwards. So the third story is when Darth Maul is yet to be Darth Sidious's apprentice, and he's still training, learning how to be a great warrior. He's training with this kind of not bounty hunter group, but it's mercenary force, I guess, would how you would look at it. And he's trying to learn how to handle his non-force powers, how to get good with that as well. So a lot of it is kind of his actual build-up to being the character that we see in Phantom Menace. But the problem with that is, first and the second story take place right before Phantom Menace. The end of the first story is literally right into Phantom Menace. The end of, so Obi-Wan gets introduced in this plot, and it's something that I'm going to talk about when we get to the first story. But Obi-Wan's plotline in that first story ends with him and Qui-Gon getting their mission to go investigate and do the negotiations with the Trade Federation blockading Naboo. So it feels really weird when the structure of the story is kind of wrong. The individual stories themselves are structured really well. The pacing is really good. But the actual book itself, the way it combined all of these stories doesn't really make sense, which I think is a shame. Because I think the perfect way to read this story is you take the third story, then you do the second story, then you do the first story. Because Darth Maul inherently is learning in all three of these stories, and he's getting more and more competent at being a Sith. And so I think that's something I just wanted to point out right off the bat before we get into the individual stories, the plots, the themes, is that I think whoever put these stories together should have done a better job of how they put the stories together. But again, I think that's a small point here. I think that would have just been a nice little change that would have been good and made these stories better. But either way, all the stories work well themselves. So let's get into part one. So part one, like I said, is the biggest portion of the book. It's about 300 of the 430 pages. And this is titled Mean Streets and the Labyrinth. Now, I want to point out this is paced really, really well. What do I mean by that? I mean that this first story feels like a horror story, a horror film, where you're reading it, and Darth Maul is the character that is the main character, right? We are seeing a lot of things through Darth Maul. The book is named after Darth Maul. He is the bad guy, but also the character that we are, like, with the most. And you see that as he's tracking down this group of people, and he's having to do this mission, it feels like no matter what the heroes can do, they can't get away from Darth Maul. It feels like they're delaying the inevitable. So let me set the stage for what this story is about. So in Phantom Menace, we see these Neimoidians. I hope I said that right. They are basically the Trade Federation, the people that are like the top that we see at the beginning of Phantom Menace. I'll probably have an image up right now. And we see that at the beginning of this story, one of them, Hoth Mankar, is this person that betrays them. He is someone that leaves. He takes the information that he knows that there's this Sith that is behind it, and the Trade Federation, they're going to blockade Naboo and all this information, and he's going to attempt to sell it on Coruscant to eventually that'll get to the Jedi, the Republic. This is very valuable information. And so you can see right away that, okay, this is big. If this gets out, okay, things are changing, because the Jedi and the entire galaxy thinks that the Sith have been extinct for thousands of years. This is big news. Also, this would foil Sidious's plans if this blockade is known before it happens. So, right away, we're set up with the idea that this is a very important story. It's not like it's needed to understand Phantom Menace, but it adds so much backstory to Phantom Menace. That's something I really want to give a lot of credit to this story, is that when I talked about in the Disney Star Wars series I'm doing, if you haven't watched that, I would check it out. I think it's pretty good. But one of the things I talked about is that a book should not explain plot holes, or it should not be needed to fully understand or view a movie and the main series or story. This book does a great job of really complementing our main story, the Phantom Menace, and also even the Clone Wars show and things later on, really, really well. It's a great setup book, and it really heightens kind of the setup and the payoffs that we see in Phantom Menace. So I think this book does a fantastic job of understanding what a Star Wars book should be, what it should be. It should tell its own story, but also it should be complementing the bigger picture. It should be complementing our overall narrative, so that the reader feels, yes, connected to the main series, but it's still individual enough that it's its own story. And I love that. This story does it really, really, really well. So that's kind of the main setup. So Sidious then tells Maul, hunt down this Neimoidian. I hope I'm saying that right. Again, I'm not the biggest Star Wars guy, so I'm probably not going to be great on these names. And he's supposed to track him down. And Maul, he eventually is going to. And we see that there's another character, that there's this assassin or bounty hunter character, that the Neimoidians, because they also know that Hoth Mankar has also abandoned ship. They were trying to lie to Sidious. So you have another faction to also trying to find this guy. And I don't really remember the bounty hunter's name. They're not too significant overall in the story. They go out pretty early. They're kind of used to kind of like just create some chaos when when Maul is going to kill Mankar. And so there's a lot of things going on here, right? Because we have a decent amount of plot lines that are in the story that culminate really nicely. So we have Lorne Pavins, who I would say is kind of like the other main protagonist outside of like is also the main lead outside of Darth Maul. And he is someone that reminds me a lot of Han Solo, but he's not a direct carbon copy. They give him like basically the outline of Han Solo, where he's a character that can be very selfish and greedy. He's kind of a gunslinger character who's doing some very shady activity. He's involved with the Hutts. Again, you see a lot of parallels to Han Solo. But what they do is they use that format and they make it really, really cool. They just do something really awesome with it. So Lorne Pavin is a really interesting character because of his backstory. He's this guy that was working with the Jedi. He had, I'm not sure if it was a wife or a girlfriend. I can't remember what they said in the story. But he had that, and he has a kid. And well, I guess fortunately for the Jedi, unfortunately for Lorne, is that his kid is very force sensitive, has force power, and the Jedi want to take him. And Lorne, very begrudgingly agrees to this. And how do the Jedi treat Lorne? They fire him from his job. They make him really push him into how is he going to make a living, right? You've just destroyed a man's living, how he feeds his family, how he provides for, I guess, his girlfriend or his wife now, or any future children they were maybe going to have. Lorne's girlfriend / wife then leaves him. He comes to this point where he's basically living a life of crime. It's a really, really great story and setup for a character that isn't in the long term this character that's that impactful to Star Wars as a whole. He's a character that by the end of this is going to die. That's what I think is really awesome about it. And something I kind of had this idea like when I was going into the Darth Maul story, right? Because you know what's going to happen. You know that none of these characters that are being introduced can survive. Once that character learns of any information to do with the Sith or the blockade of Naboo, you know that they are destined to either die or something very unfortunate is going to happen to them, or they're going to have to go into deep hiding because it wouldn't make sense if that didn't happen. So my question was, okay, well, how does the author get us involved into these characters and actually care about them when we know inevitably they're going to die? And he does a fantastic job with not only a character like Lorne Pavan, but he does a really good job with a character like I-5, who, again, I think is a really a great mixture of a character like K2SO and C-3PO. K2SO is the main robot or droid in Rogue One. Feels like a lot of that because I-5 is a really good a droid that can fight, has these cool little laser guns on his fingers or something. It's really cool. It provides a lot of kind of our comedy relief while also being a really sentient character as well, which I thought was really interesting, and the way that ends up happening as well. We'll get to kind of how their arcs all wrap up, but just kind of introducing us into these characters. We then have Darsha Asand, who is a Jedi Padawan who's being sent out on her mission to try and become a Jedi Knight because she is a Jedi Padawan right now. And there's some really interesting dynamics here because, like I talked about with me and my friend's review on Star Wars The Force Awakens, this book does exactly how you build characters right. You have two characters that are very different, where you look at this character like Lorne, he's been through a lot, right? He's been through the criminal side of the world, he worked with the Jedi, he's lost a lot. He is on one side of it, and then you have the other side of it where Darsha, she's only known the Jedi. She hasn't really experienced much of the world. She doesn't know a lot of the negative sides of the Jedi. She's someone that can't even comprehend how someone like Lorne would hate the Jedi. And by the end of this story or this book, the two kind of come much closer into the middle, where Lorne starts to accept that not all Jedi are bad because of how Darsha is. She's a great Jedi Padawan. She shows a lot of great qualities. Where Darsha sees some of the things that the Jedi have been doing, the way that they treated Lorne, the way that Coruscant is as a planet. The underground is completely polluted. It's being run by criminals. It's an awful place of being able to live. And you look at the way I think Lorne puts some of his ideas into Darsha and the vice versa, and the two they meet more in the middle. Their characters are impacted. They're changed. And the two even start to romantically kind of have feelings, but the problem is they both know that they can't ever have a relationship. And that's even more tragic because we see that the Jedi can't have emotional attachment, and Lorne as well can't marry a Jedi. That just isn't his thing, and he wants to get off world. So there's a lot of great writing here between these two characters. And we even see for a character like Lorne as well, the idea of, again, kind of a Han Solo thing where Lorne is given this point where, Darsha has died for them to, basically get away. And Lorne could, he could go to the Jedi Temple, he could give them the information and, stay under their protection and run. It feels like what he's been doing his whole life, running. And he doesn't do that. Now, maybe, again, with hindsight, we know that this isn't a good decision. If Lorne had gone to the Jedi Temple, How many lives could have been saved? Countless. But Lorne is tired of running. You know, he's watched, you know, somebody else that he, you know, came to care about die, and he goes to face his death openly. Because Lorne is someone that doesn't really think he can beat Darth Maul, but he's going to try. And that's what I think makes his story very compelling. Darsha, again, is another character very compelling, where she's someone that starts to learn from her teachings about the Jedi, what they really should be. And, you know, she gives her life to protect Lorne and I-5. It's a really great story because it makes you feel for these characters. And, you know, even though they're destined to die, they can't survive the story and for it to make sense. You feel for them, you know, you feel for it. And Lorne's is especially tragic because Lorne is tracking Darth Maul, right? So after Darth Maul, you know, he kills Darsha, he believes that Lorne and I-5 are also dead because there's an explosion and there's no forms of life because, again, I-5 and Lorne have basically, like, frozen themselves. So they aren't really able to be detected by Darth Maul. And I think some readers may look at this story and go, okay, our good guys survive again. They, you know, they get away from Darth Maul, and they might not like that. Personally, I thought it made sense. I thought all the points were logical, where whether it's like a monster gets in between Darth Maul and our crew, or we see that, you know, we have to continuously see people sacrificing themselves to basically give our crew some more time. I think it all works really, really well. And, you know, we get to this endpoint where Darth Maul he's going to meet Darth Sidious because his mission has been complete, and he has the holocron that has all the recorded information that Hoth Moniker put on it about the blockade of Naboo and everything going on with the Trade Federation and Darth Sidious and all that going on. And so it makes logical sense what we see, that, you know, Lorne basically gets the better of Darth Maul. And that's a common theme that we see with Darth Maul, is that Darth Maul is a highly skilled warrior. He is highly skilled within the Force as well. But that doesn't stop Maul from being someone that is arrogant, can be someone that's reckless at times. He's someone that views himself above other life forms, and because he does that at times, it gets him into trouble. And that happens multiple times, right? It's not something that is like, oh, you know, this is just done for the plot. It's a part of Darth Maul's character. When we talk about that, a bounty hunter I talked about earlier that ends up being sent by the Trade Federation because, again, they don't tell Darth Sidious that Hoth Moniker basically is, you know, missing, right? They don't tell him that, right? Darth Sidious just kind of figures it out and sends Maul on his own. They don't know that. The Trade Federation doesn't know that Sidious, like, sent out Maul. So they send out this bounty hunter, and this bounty hunter starts following Maul, and Maul notices it, but he doesn't really pay it any attention, right? He doesn't think it's a big deal. That gets him into trouble. And we see at other points of the story where Maul does things that are just reckless. He doesn't either mask his force enough, or he lets things sneak up on him because he's not focused. And that's a lot of what goes on here. And so when we see that Lorne catches him off guard, and again, there is a reason that he catches him off guard, because there was this monster they had encountered that was not, like, it didn't have any Force stuff going on with it. Like, it was like a wall against the Force, more or less. And so Lorne has a piece of this that they had gotten from the monster, and he has it on him so that Darth Maul can't sense him, because it's like a blocking of the Force type thing, which kind of makes sense. And Lorne gets the better of Darth Maul for a second, until he doesn't. Darth Maul kind of is stunned, because, again, there's this idea that the gun that Lorne has, it's not been charged for a while. It only has a couple shots in it for stunning, or one for kill. And he stuns Maul for a little while, and it doesn't work. Darth breaks out of it. Maul, you know, cuts his arm with it. I think it's the arm that he has the gun in. And Lorne basically makes a run for it. You know, he tries to find someone. And who does he find but Darth Sidious? Now, and this is even more tragic, is that Lorne thinks that, oh yeah, he knows who this is. He knows who Palpatine is, right? And he goes straight to him. And he thinks, wow, my mission is going to be complete. The Jedi are going to, you know, take out Maul. I tried my best, but they're going to do it. And, you know, this wasn't for nothing. And even as Lorne dies, he doesn't realize he's been betrayed, because he opens the door and Maul is there. And Maul kills him. But the whole time Lorne is thinking, my mission is complete. When in reality, Lorne is just another casualty to the Sith plot. He didn't complete his mission. He failed. It's a really, really interesting way of doing the character because it's really tragic. And that's kind of like the overall plot. I left out a lot there. Again, I would really read this story if you haven't. It's fantastic. I didn't really give you guys the complete plot breakdown. I gave you like kind of the broad spectrum. Obi-Wan is also involved in it. He's not really a major character, which I'm happy about because Obi-Wan gets introduced like maybe about halfway through the story. And I, for one, was someone that didn't want him in the story because I didn't really feel like he was necessary to this story. And also, I don't think it made sense based on what Obi-Wan's knowledge was of Darth Maul going into Phantom Menace. Like, he has no idea who he is. And this book does right? Obi-Wan is brought in as this character basically to investigate what happened with Darsha and then also Darsha's master, who ends up dying as well in this book. And that's kind of like what happens there. We get some really good like development of where Obi-Wan is as a character at this point. And so I thought it was good. We see a little bit with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, and it's kind of like a just, okay, let's just set them up right before Phantom Menace as well type thing. They weren't really too involved in the actual story. But something I really loved about this story is it makes us question the Jedi. In the main movies, right, we're really led to believe that the Jedi are the good side. They are the good people. And in a lot of ways, a lot of the Jedi have the right approach. They want good, right? They want peace. They don't want violence, all these things. But I want you guys to really look at the differences between the Sith and the Jedi. When Palpatine's like manipulating Anakin in Revenge of the Sith, you know, he brings up some points that I think are very valid. Let's look at the way the Jedi manipulate people, right? They manipulate parents to let their children go to become Jedi. And then they're willing to do whatever to get them away from them, right? Like Lorne is, you know, he gives permission for them to train his son. They then fire him and destroy his entire way of life and completely destroy his life as a whole. And again, I know Lorne makes his own choices that lead him down darker paths as well, but the Jedi are at the forefront of that. So I think you look at things and the Jedi definitely manipulate people. They do things to get to their own ends. Now, I want to look at another ideology that the Jedi kind of have, is the idea of doing what is right. But what defines what is right? And who is deciding who is right and who is wrong? That's something that I think, you know, me being on a Song of Ice and Fire fan, doing what's right is not always the easy choice. A lot of the times, doing what is right is the hard choice. And I think we see the Jedi, you know, this is the same with the Sith, right? But the Sith are much more aware that they're not doing what's right for everyone else. They're doing what's right for themselves. And I think the Jedi at times get lost in that. I think the Jedi get lost in what is right for themselves or what's right for other people and what is, you know, the best choice of attack. I think they get lost in that a lot of times, that they can be very arrogant and they just don't do things to me that are very Jedi-like in their own, like, creed or words. Now, another thing we really look at is the idea of emotional attachment. You know, Darsha is this character that has a lot of emotional attachment. She's someone that, you know, really cares about her master, and when her master dies, she really struggles with the idea of death and, you know, her master being gone. She struggles with the idea of having, you know, feelings for Lorne Pavan. She is someone that struggles with that part of the Jedi Creed. And again, it goes into more of this idea that basically giving yourself away from emotion and not having any, you know, connection to people is part of the problem for the Jedi. And that's going to kind of lead me to my next point, is like, when we look at Coruscant as a planet, this whole story takes place on Coruscant. You know, we see that Darth Maul has gone, you know, very close to the Jedi Temple with nobody noticing, right? We see that there's this criminal underground completely under Coruscant. The whole under part of Coruscant is really like two different areas. You have the upper parts, which is more of the lavish side, the upper class. Then you have the lower side of the planet, which is polluted. It's disgusting. It's nasty. It's unhealthy living conditions filled with criminals and gang wars going on. And it shows to me how ineffective the Jedi can be at being like these guardians of the galaxy. Or they bring peace. They can't even keep that on their own planet, let alone the galaxy. And I think it shows me to a lot of degree how bad the public and corrupt the Republic has become, even without Palpatine. And the Jedi themselves have become too arrogant. They don't, worry about this underground. Again, we see how, like, dangerous it is. Darsha's master thinks that a simple reconnaissance mission where she's just supposed to go pick someone up and bring them back is too much for her. I just think that there's a lot of things that this book does really well on presenting the Jedi in a different light than we see in so many other medias. Now, again, I want to think about something else here, is that Darsha fails one mission. And really, Darsha thinks that her life is over with the Jedi. Because of this mission, she will never be part of the Jedi. She won't be given the status of being a Jedi Knight. She won't even get another chance. How does that look for the Jedi? The Jedi are this group that you make one mistake and now they don't care about you and they dump you out. There's a lot there that I think is very compelling writing for the Jedi and how they treat people. Not that different from the Sith. Something we're going to talk about with the Sith is they manipulate, people from an early age. Darth Maul is kind of, in my opinion, a mockery of the Jedi system. Darth Sidious brings up Maul from a young age and implements things and manipulates Maul to where there's full obedience. And what does that kind of feel like? The Jedi nearly do the same thing. They manipulate people, they bring in children at a very young age so that they can mold their minds and make them loyal to them, more or less. I think there are some really great parallels that we see in this story on how we look at the Sith and the Jedi and how they're really not that different in a lot of ways. Now, this is, I wanted to say, the perfect setup for Phantom Menace. If you're going to watch Phantom Menace, and me now personally, when I watch Phantom Menace, when I look at Phantom Menace, I will have this story in the back of my mind that, if a different thing had happened, this story wouldn't have happened. And, the build-up we get for Darth Maul here and the character that he is by the time, he faces down Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan, who he is as a person and the things he's gone through. There's a lot here that really heightens Phantom Menace and makes me enjoy that movie more because of this book. Now, I know that, again, this book is not canon, quote unquote, which is complete just bullshit. This story is better than anything Disney Star Wars has put out, in my opinion. So I'm going to consider this canon. I really don't care about Disney Star Wars and whatever they want to say. But, So moving on. I also like the idea of, we have a theme of greed. Hoth Monclar is this character that he, again, betrays the Trade Federation for greed, but the Trade Federation themselves, they fall under Darth Sidious because of greed, and also they are weak. They are cowardly. We see that Lorne is willing to do risky things, again, for more money, for greed, for purposes. Those are a lot of things that we see in this story, the idea of greed. And this is something we see a little bit more with the other two stories, in my opinion. But we see how the Sith operate, how they like to operate in the shadows, how they like to manipulate events while not having it implied that it was them. We don't really see that in this first story. I think that's more of a second and third story. But again, it shows, again, in this story, Maul's strengths and weaknesses like we'd already talked about early on. We get some great foreshadowing as to why Obi-Wan was able to defeat Darth Maul, but also how Maul is able to defeat Qui-Gon. Because again, Maul is someone that has really good strengths and really bad weaknesses. Darth Maul is someone that in a fight is really good. Like, he is unmatched to most, right? He faces a Jedi master in this book and defeats them with relative ease. But we also see why he can be defeated, because sometimes he's reckless. He's too arrogant. He is someone that thinks he's better than other people. And that is the reason Obi-Wan is able to beat him. So I think that there's some great writing for that point as well. And I noticed that this story feels a lot like if A New Hope went wrong and Darth Maul killed our crew brutally and got the Death Star plans back. That is the closest representation of what I can say on this story. And yeah, so I wanted to do a couple like character comparisons. I kind of already did this already with some of our characters like Lorne and also I-5, but I also wanted to point out that Darsha feels a lot like Ahsoka in the way that they're very young people that as they grow into the Jedi, they think there's some things that the Jedi just do not do right, and they have some actual gripes with them. So I think that Darsha is a really good comparison to Ahsoka. And that is kind of going to get us into the next phase of the story in Darth Maul Saboteur. And again, this last part of the video is going to be much shorter because there just isn't as much here. The first story was much longer than the second and the third. So into our second story. Now, the second story we know takes place before the first story for a number of reasons. One, we know that the first story leads directly into the Phantom Menace, so there wasn't really any time for Darth Maul to be going on this little adventure. And two, we know that the person that had actually betrayed the Trade Federation, that was the whole, like, main point of what kickstarted the plot in the first story, is still with the Trade Federation and is still alive within the second story. And thirdly, we see that the Trade Federation actually does not have a seat on the Republic yet. We see Dorvella, a planet that's used in mining a lot of ores. It's very rich in resources that are very valuable to the world at this point. And so what we end up seeing is this power struggle, right? On Dorvella, we have two competing factions that are trying to basically gain control over the planet, and they will be the one that basically goes forward as that company. Now, again, what we end up seeing is we see a lot of good cameos in the last two stories, right? So in this story, we see a cameo of Tarkin for a little bit. So, you know, there's that nice little cameo that we get in there. He's the one that basically sets this task where we're going to have it decided. Whoever can bring about this order in the best way possible without any problems will be the person that takes over control of mining on Dorvella. And so the whole plot is that Darth Sidious does not want this to happen. Darth Sidious wants the Trade Federation to take over the planet, or to take over the mining operation, to take over the trade routes, just to get more power for the Trade Federation. Two, this would give them a Republic seat, because again, they'd be on control of a planet. And three, this would kind of cement a bit more of the loyalty for the Trade Federation to Sidious, kind of reward them for their loyalty and all of that. Now, we actually know that this actually doesn't actually end up working because Hoth Moncard does inevitably betray them. But I guess it does work for the other Nemordians, I believe that's how you say their name. Sorry if I get that wrong. So what Sidious wants Maul to do is he wants him to basically cause a bunch of chaos, to have these two competing companies at war, basically, which they're kind of already at, and basically destroy them both and let it come in where the Trade Federation can just slip on in and take over. So that's kind of the general plot of what's happening. And again, the story is not nearly as long as the first story, so I'll briefly give you kind of the ideas of what Darth Maul does and how he accomplishes his mission. So more or less, Maul is really using his Sith powers, what he's learned. He's being very discreet. He's playing in the shadows. This is not at all like the first story, where the first story we saw Maul having to adjust to his situations. He was kind of reckless. We saw a lot of Darth Maul's weaknesses and how the forces of Lorne, Darsha, I-5, they could escape Maul. In this, we see more of a cold, calculated Maul, where he's following people, but no one knows he's there. We see him spying on people. We see him bugging people. He's recreating messages so that people think that this is happening, when in reality, that's not what's happening at all. He's taking snippets of people's voices and putting it into a different context. So we see Maul use what the Sith and what Palpatine has been teaching him, how to manipulate events. And this is something I think is really great because it shows what Palpatine's been doing in the background this whole time without even being the Chancellor yet. He's someone that's been able to manipulate events through the shadows with nobody knowing, with the Jedi being completely fooled. No one knows. Right? Maul doesn't even actually kill anyone with a lightsaber until like the very end of the book, or this story. Not book, but this story particularly. So what I love about this is that it shows how Maul is someone that's able to do all of these things while also having restraint. It's kind of like the opposite of what we saw again with the first story, where this story is more about how Darth Maul is cold, he's calculated, how he's in control more. And I think the first story shows why he loses to Obi-Wan. It's more about that reason. And I think the second story is more about why Darth Maul is someone that could beat Qui-Gon Jinn, and shows, again, a lot of his great talents. So I really don't have a lot to say about the second story because, again, it's not that long. It's something that I think it doesn't give as much character building for someone like Maul, whereas the first and the third stories do. It's that story that's like, it's kind of the middle story, and I really like it. It goes a long way, but I do think of the three, it's probably the weakest of the three. So that's going to kind of get into the last story. So the last story is called Restraint. It's only about 30-40 pages long, so it's a very quick read, and I would highly recommend, if you guys read this book, to read that story first. It begins on, I believe, page 391, I think. No, sorry, 389. I would read that story first, because it's when Maul is very much younger. He is someone that, he's still, I think he's about 15 or 16, I think is what it says in the book at this point. He is someone that is not at all really involved with Palpatine's manipulations or part of what he's doing and how he's doing his plan, his great plan. Maul is someone at this point is very much left in the dark. He's someone that's being taught under this guy. I don't remember his name, unfortunately. And he's learning how to be a warrior. He's learning how to be someone that can use his abilities without using the Force. And again, it's giving him that side where non-Force abilities, he's getting stronger, while also part of his other training with Sidious is building up his Force power ability. So he's kind of getting the best of both worlds in his training. And this story is all about, I think, Darth Maul's kind of manipulation being done by Sidious, where Darth Maul is this person that is completely brainwashed. And what this story is all about is kind of showing that, right? Like, Darth Maul is someone that even through when again, now we see the Night Sisters and we see Talzin pop in as well. So we get some great cameos as well. And this story really name drops a lot of Clone Wars characters. We get characters like Ventress, she's in here. We get Savage Opress's name dropped in here. So there's some really great cameos in there as well. And so this story is kind of about Darth Maul, kind of his coming to age story. So Darth Maul is set out and he's in this group, but he has an enemy, right? There's a Mandalorian within this group that is kind of figuring out who Darth Maul is, and it's because Darth Maul is someone that's not restraining himself. He's letting his anger and his emotion get the best of him, and he's doing things that, yes, are letting him beat this Mandalorian character, but at the same time, it's giving him away that there's some special Force power behind him, and that's something that's not good, because again, Sidious does not want this, because it's going to bring up questions on, okay, is Darth Maul some sort of Jedi Padawan that's been sent here? Why is he... It's going to draw the attention of a Jedi here, because there's a Force user, and they're going to realize, wait a minute, he knows all these things, but he's no Jedi. So that's kind of the main premise here, is Maul's, one, his loyalty to Sidious, two, the manipulation being done by Sidious, three, kind of explaining Darth Maul's origins and more about him as a character. That's perfect for like the Clone Wars series. It's a really good introduction into like Darth Maul in that series. And then four, we kind of have Darth Maul basically completing his trials and becoming like an actual warrior inducted into this group. So we kind of are like building up to this idea, and we see Maul is going on this trial, and it's this trial where you kind of have to be out in the wilderness for like 7 days. You have to make it to this certain point. It kind of reminds me of a lot of like the Spartan stuff that we see from history, where they had to do something similar. It's a similar idea, and Darth Maul is basically, he doesn't get anything except for this little blade, and he has to hunt for his food, he has to survive on his own. And so when we're going through this, and we're going through, it's, he's in there or whatever, he's about to complete it, he is kidnapped. He is kidnapped by the Night Sisters and Talzin, as well as, like I talked about earlier. And what I think is very compelling is we see how good Darth Sidious's mind control / manipulation is on Maul. Maul thinks that this is a test. He thinks that he's being tested, that he needs to get out of this, and that he is staying loyal to Sidious. And that's really great, because it builds the entire relationship between Sidious and Maul. When we get to Phantom Menace, you're sitting here going, okay, they've had years and years to develop this. Maul is completely loyal to Sidious. And when we get to Clone Wars, even after that, you really feel like why Darth Maul feels so betrayed, because Darth Maul has thought that he is this person that's the apprentice. He's worked for years and years and years to be this person. He's been molded into this. He thought he was the one to kind of be that Padawan to Sidious and bring down the Jedi. And Sidious just used Maul. That's kind of the big point of this. And so what ends up happening here is we see the Night Sisters come in. They were tricked by this Mandalorian who was kind of using it as a means to an end, right? He didn't like Maul, so he was getting him off the planet, also taking in a kind of a deal for them to be captured as well. The Night Sisters, for again military purposes that really aren't that important to the story. But the Night Sisters, and Talzin specifically, they come to get Maul because Maul belongs to them, they believe, right? That he belongs on Dathomir with his brothers, the Night Brothers. Again, we see with Savage Opress as well. He is not in this story, but he's kind of mentioned. He's, just a nice little cameo of him getting name dropped. And so they kidnap Maul, and on their way back to go off-world, they are ambushed. And so the next part of this story, again, it's only 30, 40 pages, is Maul basically getting them out of the way, showing off his prowess, and proving to Sidious that he is ready to be that apprentice, or at least start taking on some of that responsibility and progressing. And we see that Sidious, he shows up, he figures out what happened, and he basically claims Maul. He basically is like, you guys can piss off, you Night Sisters, Talzin, you can go. You go back to Dathomir, he's mine. And this is where we see that Sidious finally puts that trust into Maul, slowly letting him into that he's a Sith, that he is trying to bring down the Jedi and all these things, and that Maul could be a very vital asset if he continues to progress and do what Sidious tells him to do. Again, there's a lot of great groundwork for the character of Maul that's done here. We see a lot really into how Sidious is training Maul. And the story ends with a really awesome ending. And it's not awesome for, like, say, the people involved in the story, but it's kind of the completion of how extreme Sidious and Maul will go. And Sidious basically says, these people know too much. You have to kill all the people you've been training for years, since you were a child. You have to kill, I believe is it Teza or something like that, who has been this character that's been basically protecting Maul, has been Maul's trainer for years. It's kind of like a second father figure to him. And Maul is forced to kill all of them because they know too much information. And they're going to start fresh. So Maul, at the age, again, this young, is unwavering in his loyalty. He doesn't even flinch at what Sidious tells him to do. He kills all of these people. Everyone at this, like, warrior camp, more or less, or this mercenary group, are killed. It's a really dark ending to a really dark book where no one gets out alive if they come into Maul and Sidious. And I want to say at the end of this book, I feel like invigorated me getting back into Star Wars. And by getting back into Star Wars, I really feel like going back, reading a lot of the Legends books, especially the prequel era stuff, because I think a lot of this is just some fantastic writing. It makes me appreciate Darth Maul even more, who is my favorite character from any of the time periods within Star Wars. I think he's just a really interesting character. I love the design of the character. I love that the struggles, Clone Wars, the way that they develop him as a character, bring him back. And I think he has a perfect arc. His ending in Rebels, it's the perfect culmination of Maul's arc. And he's a character that, in a way, is very similar, if you look at my A Song of Ice and Fire channel, of Catelyn. He's a character that is constantly in battle of emotion and logic and staying cool and level-headed. He's at that constant battle, and it makes him such a compelling character. And just for the end of this video, I'm going to throw up some images just because I dressed up as Darth Maul last year, and I just think it was pretty cool. It's a very nice little fitting touch to put in here at the end of the video. All right, I noticed after doing my editing that I actually didn't give my grade of the book. So here at the end, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. I thought the writing was really good. I think the themes were good. The stories were really good. I think the only thing and the only reason I would refrain from giving it like a perfect grade, I really am someone believes the story could have been much more, or this, not the story, but the book could have been much more coherent if the first two stories had been put at the beginning, because it would have been more of a journey for the character of Maul. Instead of, like, we see him closer to his prime, and then we start to just regress. It's a weird way to have the stories formatted to me. Like, they're all individually good, but put together, they're not as cohesive as they could have been. So that's kind of my only real knock for this story. I think on every other level, it pretty much ticks all the boxes that I would enjoy in a story. And yeah, so I hope you guys all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.